Restarting the stream. The previous stream was disconnected. I hope this continues my broadcast where I left off. And it was this part right here. I've restarted the browser, I've restarted OBS. This browser, waterfilter, sometimes gives a problem. And we're right here somewhere in text. I've copied it to a text editor so that I can switch off this article if I want to. But let's continue the reading now. Sorry for the interruption.
The National Defense Program, he said. Although the shooting war is over, we are in the midst of a Cold War which is getting warmer. Fellow Zionist kingpin, Rabbi Stephen S. Wise, peculiarly predicted the ascendancy of Woodrow Wilson to the presidency, and in his autobiography, Challenging Years, p. 161, boasted that an immensely influential hidden power, with which he was intimately acquainted, had chosen Wilson as a major pawn in their political game even before the president of Princeton University had entered into politics. Wise would go on to become one of Wilson's chief advisors, who was instrumental in persuading Wilson to support the Balfour Declaration. Wilson, of course, was the poodle on a string of the conniving protoclist Jews, having signed into law two of the most important planks of their Communist Manifesto, Plank number 2, a heavy progressive or graduated income tax, and Plank number 5, the creation of a central bank, with exclusive monopoly. Perhaps in a fit of rebelliousness against his masters, Woodrow Wilson made this ominous remark about the secret forces controlling the United States government from behind the scenes. We have come to be one of the worst ruled, one of the most completely controlled and dominated, governments in the civilized world, no longer a government by free opinion, no longer a government by conviction and the vote of the majority, but a government by the opinion and the duress of small groups of dominant men. Woodrow Wilson. New Freedom, a call for the emancipation of the generous energies of a people. S.L., into Publish Com, 2007, p. 201. Further clarification and confirmation of this ongoing Jewish world government project was provided by Israel's first Prime Minister, the Jewish supremacist, Talmudist, Zionist terrorist and Bolshevist internationalist, David Ben-Gurion. In 1962, Ben-Gurion predicted the end of the Cold War in the late 1980s, and went on to express a burning desire for world governance, led by the Jewish nation. The image of the world in 1987 as traced in my imagination, the Cold War will be a thing of the past. Internal pressure of the constantly growing intelligentsia in Russia for more freedom and the pressure of the masses for raising their living standards may lead to a gradual democratization of the Soviet Union. On the other hand, the increasing influence of the workers and farmers, and rising political importance of men of science, may transform the United States into a welfare state with a planned economy. Western and Eastern Europe will become a federation of autonomous states having a socialist and democratic regime. With the exception of the USSR as a federated Eurasian state, all other continents will become united in a world alliance, at whose disposal will be an international police force. All armies will be abolished, and there will be no more wars. In Jerusalem, the United Nations, a truly United Nations, will build a shrine of the prophets to serve the federated union of all continents. This will be the scene of the Supreme Court of mankind, to settle all controversies among the federated continents, as prophesied by Isaiah. Gurion, David Ben and Duchovny, Amram. David Ben-Gurion, in his own words, Fleet Press Corporation, 1969, p. 116, also quoted in Look magazine, January 16, 1962, p. 20. Ben-Gurion reiterated his ostentatious dreams of a Jewish utopia when he said, "Jerusalem is not the capital of Israel and world Jewry, it aspires to become the spiritual center of the world." The Israeli Prime Minister was a chauvinistic Jewish supremacist who stated his rotten aims openly. He spilled the blood of tens of thousands of Palestinians and was responsible for the uprooting and beheading of their nation. He, along with his clique of ferocious Zionist bandits, gangsters and thugs, masterminded the Nakba, which has been described as the mass deportation of 1 million Palestinians from their cities and villages, massacres of civilians, and the razing to the ground of hundreds of Palestinian villages. Flaunting his Jewish pride and arrogantly mocking his victims by falsely claiming to be a victim, Ben-Gurion sanctimoniously said, "We would not have taken on this war merely for the purpose of enjoying this tiny state. There have been only two great people, the Greeks and the Jews. Perhaps the Greeks were even greater than the Jews, but now I can see no sign of that old greatness in the modern Greeks. Maybe when the present process is finished we too will degenerate, but I see no sign of degeneration at present. Suffering makes a people greater, and we have suffered much. We had a message to give the world, but we were overwhelmed, and the message was cut off in the middle. In time there will be millions of us, becoming stronger and stronger, and we will complete the message." Our policy must be the unity of the human race. The world is divided into two blocks. We consider that the United Nations ideal is a Jewish ideal. Ben-Gurion believed Jews to be living gods on earth, superior to Gentiles in every way, stating, "My concept of the messianic ideal and vision is not a metaphysical one but a socio-cultural moral one. I believe in our moral and intellectual superiority, in our capacity to serve as a model for the redemption of the human race. This belief of mine is based on my knowledge of the Jewish people, not some mystical faith. The glory of the divine presence is within us, in our hearts, and not outside of us." Hertzberg, Arthur. The Zionist State. Jewish Publication Society, 1997, p. 94. Ben-Gurion's prophecy of an earthly Jewish kingdom ruled from Jerusalem was similarly expressed by the Temple Mount Faithful Organization newsletter, 2000, which says, "The real United Nations organization will be the kingdom of God which will soon be established in Jerusalem, based on the holy laws of God. The temple will again be the heart, soul and focus of Israel and the nations. Mashiach ben David will come and will be the king of Israel and the world. He will come to Jerusalem and rule from there and establish the kingdom of God over all the world. Jerusalem instead of New York will be the center of this godly United Nations organization and a new era of justice, spiritual holiness. A real law based on the Word of God in the Torah and a real peace will open and will be established in Jerusalem exactly as Isaiah prophesied, the word that Isaiah the son of Amoz saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem. And it shall come to pass in the last days, that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established on the top of the mountains, and shall be exalted above the hills, and all nations shall flow to it. And many people shall go and say, Come, and let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, and he will teach us of his ways, and we will walk in his paths, for from Zion shall go forth Torah, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. And he shall judge among the nations, and shall decide for many people, and they shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, nor shall they learn war any more. O house of Jacob, come, and let us walk in the light of the Lord." Isaiah 2-1-5. As demonstrated by the Jewish supremacist group Temple Mount Faithful, the ancient Jewish plan for world ownership is prophesied in the Jewish Old Testament book of Isaiah. This book, among others, exemplifies the Jewish supremacist mentality. For example, in Isaiah 60 hours 16 minutes, it says, "Thou shalt also suck the milk of the Gentiles, and shalt suck the breast of kings, and thou shalt know that I the Lord am thy Savior and thy Redeemer, the mighty one of Jacob. Isaiah 61:5 reiterates this concept of Gentile servitude to the Jews, stating, "And strangers, non-Jews, shall stand and feed your flocks, and the sons of the alien, non-Jews, shall be your plowmen and your vine dressers." Isaiah 60:5 and Isaiah 61:6 prophesied that the Jews will come to possess all the wealth of the world. The wealth of the nations, the Goyim, shall come unto thee, the Jews. You will feed on the wealth of nations, and in their riches you will boast. When Ben-Gurion referred to everybody in his protocolist prophecy, he was most likely only referring to Jews, since the Zohar states, living soul.
I'm waiting for virtual DJ to start.
How long will that take?
Good question. I've closed Waterfox browser, CPU usage is at 39%. I've clicked on virtual DJ twice, but it still hasn't started up yet. And I think they are blocking my PC because the CPU usage is very low and things are not working the way they normally do. Sometimes it's a matter of restarting my computer. Virtual DJ seems to be started, so let's end task. And let's see if it can start now. There it is.
Visit my YouTube channel, youtube.com/user/ulrichbchoffman. Visit universalpeace.jimdo.com 999 Prologic 999.blog2blog.nl universecreator.weebly.com doctorna.wordpress.com for universal peace.
I'm Donald Trump. I own the Miss Universe pageant, and I'm here to answer your questions.
Refers to Israel, who have holy living souls from above, and cattle and creeping thing and beast of the earth to the other peoples who are not living soul. This view is corroborated by the crazed ravings of many prominent Jewish rabbis, including many of Judaism's most revered sages. Take for instance Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, 1745–1812, the founder of the extremist Jewish sect Chabad, who cursed Gentiles,
Universal
claiming we
peace now.
possess evil souls. Gentile souls are of a completely different and inferior order.
Universal
they are totally
peace.
evil, with no redeeming qualities whatsoever. Old Jews are innately good, old Gentiles are innately evil.
Universal
Quoted in
peace now.
Foxbrunner, A. Roman. Chabad, the Hasidism of R. Shneur Zalman of Liadi. University of Alabama Press, 1992, p. 108. Rabbi Kook the Elder, the revered father of the messianic tendency of Jewish fundamentalism, said, "The difference between a Jewish soul and souls of non-Jews, all of them in all different levels, is greater and deeper than the difference between a human soul and the souls of cattle." Quoted in Shahak, Israel and Mesvinsky. Norman. Jewish Fundamentalism in Israel, London, Pluto Press, 1999, p. 176. The late, highly revered Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, the Lubavitcher Rebbe who headed the Shabbat movement and wielded great influence in Israel as well as in the U.S., explained that the difference between a Jewish and a non-Jewish person stems from the common expression, "Let us differentiate." Thus, we do not have a case of profound change in which a person is merely on a superior level. Rather, we have a case of "let us differentiate between totally different species." This is what needs to be said about the body. The body of a Jewish person is of a totally different quality from the body of members of all nations of the world. A non-Jew's entire reality is only vanity. It is written, "And the strangers shall guard and feed your flocks." Isaiah 61:5. The entire creation of a non-Jew exists only for the sake of the Jews. Ibid. p. 59. An immigrant to Israel from the U.S., Rabbi Ginsburg speaks freely of his belief in the Jews' genetic-based, spiritual superiority over non-Jews. If you saw two people drowning, a Jew and a non-Jew, the Torah says you save the Jewish life first. If every simple cell in a Jewish body entails divinity, is a part of God, then every strand of DNA is part of God. Therefore, something is special about Jewish DNA. If a Jew needs a liver, can you take the liver of an innocent non-Jew passing by to save him? The Torah would probably permit that. Jewish life has an infinite value. Ibid. p. 62. Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, the head of Shas's Council of Torah Sages, declared that Gentiles exist solely to serve the Jews as slaves. According to the rabbi, Goyim were born only to serve us. Without that, they have no place in the world, only to serve the people of Israel. Mandel, Jonah. Yosef, Gentiles exist only to serve Jews. The Jerusalem Post. October 18, 2010.
So in reality, I just want to say this, that you may break any commandment to save a human life, except the 3 cardinal sins, according to the believers, and they call this pikuach nefesh. Salam shalom.
And these are just the statements Jews have made aloud. Just imagine how they talk when they know Gentiles aren't listening. Another cardinal proof of the Zionist world conspiracy was the incredible foresight displayed by Zionist leader Simon Maximilian Sudfeld, alias Max Nordau, Theodor Herzl's close confidant, who convinced him to organize the first Zionist conference in Basel, Switzerland in 1897. At the 6th Zionist Congress in 1903, 11 years before World War I commenced and 45 years before Israel was established, Nordau spoke of a coming world war resulting in the creation of a Jewish state in Palestine, which England would help to procure for them. Let me tell you the following words as if I were showing you the rungs of a ladder leading upward and upward. Herzl, the Zionist Congress, the English-Uganda Proposition, the future World War, the Peace Conference where, with the help of England, a free and Jewish Palestine will be created. Quoted in Rosenthal, Littman. A Prophet Speaks, American Jewish News, New York, Volume 4, Number 2, September 19, 1919. p. 464, also quoted in Stevens, Richard P. Zionism and Palestine Before the Mandate. Institute for Palestine Studies, 1972, p. 153. Strange and incredible, is it not? That a leading Zionist Jew was able to predict the course of events of the next several decades. It appears Max Nordau was not the only Jew with an uncanny gift of foresight. Leading communist ideologue and co-author of the Communist Manifesto, Crypto-Jew Friedrich Engels made it clear that he and his fellow communist comrades were comfortable
So I have to pause the thing for a second.
Now bidding.
Okay, I won the item, it's awesome. So we continue the reading of the Zion Crime Factory. I think it is. Let's just start this engine.
With human sacrifices amounting to the loss of tens of millions of lives, in order to pave the way for revolution and a global communist imperium. In 1887, Engels somehow knew a world war was on the horizon and would soon arrive on the shores of Europe, laying waste to Europe's empires and thus leaving the continent vulnerable to communist revolution, upheaval.
Of members the whole of the committee of 300 weekend two cogs by means of wars in the advanced countries by means of starvation and disease in the third world countries, the death of 3 billion people by the year 2050 people they call you substances. I, Donald Trump, am going to stop spending money on the stupid fucking military and start spending for universal peace. Universal peace. Now, this is Donald Trump. Prevent a two-state solution. World by any means necessary. Included in the two-state solution agreement that the allies of Israel and Palestine may not intervene if they go to war with each other to prevent a two-state solution. World universal peace. Now, keys to you, well, Rick. Thank you for your idea for universal peace. Universal peace now.
And subversion. No other war is now possible for Prussia-Germany than a world war, and indeed a world war of hitherto unimagined sweep and violence. 8 to 10 million soldiers will mutually kill each other off and in the process devour Europe barer than any swarm of locusts ever did. The desolation of the 30 Years' War compressed in 3 or 4 years and spread over the entire continent, famine, plague, general savagery, taking possession both of the armies and of the masses of the people, as a result of universal want, hopeless demoralization of our complex institutions of trade, industry and credit, ending in universal bankruptcy, collapse of the old states and their traditional statecraft, so that crowns will roll over the pavements by the dozens, and no one to be found to pick them up, absolute impossibility of foreseeing where this will end, or who will emerge victor from the general struggle. Only one result is absolutely sure: general exhaustion and the creation of the conditions for the final victory of the working class. Quoted in Wolf, David Bertram. Marxism, 100 Years in the Life of a Doctrine, Dial Press, 1965, p. 67. Another who predicted the impending doom of a grand European conflict was Jan Gottlieb Bloch, a Polish crypto-Jew, banker, financier, Zionist activist, campaigner against Russian anti-Semitism, and acquaintance of Theodor Herzl. In 1899, Bloch published a book about military warfare titled, Is War Now Possible? within which he envisioned a long war, a great war of entrenchments, which would involve some 10 million men. Bloch asserted that economic factors would be the dominant and decisive element in the matter and that the future of war was not fighting but famine, resulting in the bankruptcy of nations and the breakup of social organization of societies. Ferguson, Neil. The Pity of War, p. 9. It is clear that international Jews foresaw the First World War. Did they do nothing but foresee it? The facts do not stop at foresight, but run on to provocation. Perhaps prominent Zionist Jews and Communist Jews were cognizant of the eventual outbreak of a world war because they strove to bring it to fruition utilizing their unmatched money, media and political clout. The Protocols of Zion gives us insight into this question. We must be in a position to respond to every act of opposition by war with the neighbors of that country which dares to oppose us, but if these neighbors should also venture to stand collectively together against us, then we must offer resistance by a universal war. The Protocols of Zion, 7-3. Zionist Jew kingpin, Chaim Weizmann, admitted as much in a letter to Winston Churchill. Historian David Irving documented Weizmann's venture to persuade Churchill to help the Zionists create a Jewish fighting force, an army of Jewish terrorists to be used as a battering ram to forcefully overtake Palestine and wantonly genocide the Arabs living there, in exchange for the Jews dragging America into war on England's side. The arrogant and conceited Jew, Weizmann, couldn't help but boast about how his fellow Jews did it in the last war and are keen to do it again. On September 10, 1941, Weizmann therefore wrote an outspoken letter to the Prime Minister in which he recalled how the Jews of the United States had pulled their country into war before. He promised that they could do it again, provided that Britain toed the line over Palestine. 2 years had passed since the Jewish Agency had offered the support of the Jews throughout the world. The Jewish declaration of war on Germany, a whole year had passed, he added, since the PM had personally approved his offer to recruit Jews in Palestine for service in the Middle East or elsewhere. For 2 years the agency had met only humiliation. 10,000 Palestinian Jews had fought in Libya, Abyssinia, Greece, Crete, and Syria, he claimed, but this was never mentioned. Tortured by Hitler as no nation has ever been in modern times, Weizmann continued, and advertised by him as his foremost enemy, we are refused by those who fight him the chance of seeing our name and our flag appear among those arrayed against him. Artfully associating anti-Zionists with the other enemies populating Churchill's mind, Weizmann assured him that he knew this was not of his doing. It was the work of those responsible for Munich and the 1939 White Paper on Palestine. We were sacrificed, in order to win over the Mufti of Jerusalem and his friends who were serving Hitler in the Middle East. Then Weizmann came to his real sales pitch: there is only one big ethnic group, in the USA, which is willing to stand, to a man, for Great Britain, and a policy of all-out aid for her, the 5 million Jews. From Secretary Morgenthau, Governor of New York State, layman, Justice Felix Frankfurter, down to the simplest Jewish workman or trader, they are conscious of all that this struggle against Hitler implies. British statesmen, he reminded Churchill, had often acknowledged that it was these Jews who had brought the United States into the war in 1917. They are keen to do it, and may do it, again. All that he and the Jews of the United States were asking for, therefore, was the formation now of a Jewish fighting force. Irving, David. Churchill's War, Triumph in Adversity Volume 2. Focal Point Publications, 2001, pages 76-77. Also see this facsimile of Weizmann's letter to Churchill. The godfather of Zionism, Theodor Herzl, was not shy about admitting that the Jews do indeed possess the necessary power to bring about world wars and revolutions, stating, "The wealthy Jews control the world. In their hands lies the fate of government and nations. They, The Jews set governments one against the other, and by their decree governments make peace. When the wealthy Jews play, the nations and the rulers dance. In his book Jewish State, Herzl spoke of the Jews' terrible power of the purse. Every point which arises in the relations between nations is a question of might. I do not here surrender any portion of our prescriptive right when I make this statement. In the world as it now is and will probably remain, might precedes right. For us to be loyal patriots as were the Huguenots who were forced to emigrate is therefore useless. The Jews must acquire economic power sufficiently great to overcome prejudice against them. When we sink, we become a revolutionary proletariat, but when we rise, there rises also our terrible power of the purse. The desolate reality of Jewish warmongering was elucidated in the August 1877 issue of Frank Leslie's Popular Monthly, later known as the American Magazine, which reported, "Today, the great Jewish bankers, such as the Rothschilds, may almost be said to hold in their hands the peace of Europe. They are creditors of most of the governments of the world, and there are few nations willing to risk the dangers and losses of war unless they have assurance from these potent capitalists of such monetary aid as may be necessary for carrying on a campaign. In the present European war, one of the combatants, having nothing to lose, is reckless of the consequence to her already bankrupt treasury, and the other, while yet the conflict has scarcely begun, has been compelled to seek the aid of Jewish bankers to secure means for its prosecution. In 1881 the prestigious banking journal, Rhodes Journal, informed us that Jewish international bankers held the keys to peace and war in Europe, often instigating the latter for monetary gain, evidently. It must be admitted that the Jewish people control the financial markets of Europe, possessing a much greater influence than in this country. The Emperor of Russia found that he could not place a loan in the continental markets, because Rothschild did not view such a loan as favorable to the interests of England. A few Jewish bankers are therefore really the arbitrators of peace and war in Europe. The internet blogger known as the Black Rabbit of Enel compiled numerous quotes on the immense influence of the Rothschild family on his page King of the Jews, some of which I will reproduce below. The Rothschilds' official biographer, Neil Ferguson, explained the quasi-royal status of this Jewish banking dynasty and how their wealth is believed by some Jews to be for a higher purpose: to avenge the wrongs of Israel. To poorer Jews throughout Europe, Nathan Rothschild's extraordinary rise to riches had an almost mystical significance, hence the legend of the Hebrew talisman, the magical source of his good luck, which became associated with him in Jewish lore. This extraordinary story, a version of which was published by an anonymous author in London just 4 years after Nathan Rothschild's death, 1836, imagined that the source of Nathan's financial success was his possession of a magical talisman. His wealth was in fact intended for a higher purpose, to avenge the wrongs of Israel by securing the re-establishment of Judah's kingdom, then rebuilding of thy towers, O Jerusalem, and the restoration of Judea to out ancient race. Ferguson, Neil. The House of Rothschild, Volume 1, Money's Profits, 1798 to 1848, Viking, 1999, pp. 21-22. Ferguson added that, because of their wealth, other Jews looked to them for leadership in their pursuit of equal civil and political rights. As we shall see, this leadership was forthcoming from a remarkably early stage, acquiring quasi-royal status in the eyes of other Jews. Ibid. p. 22. The Niles National Register published in 1828 states, the House of Rothschild certainly stands preeminent at the recent death of one who was thought the richest banker in Europe. The Niles National Register published on Sept 19, 1835, says, "The Rothschilds are the wonders of modern banking. We see the descendants of Judah, after a persecution of 2,000 years, peering above kings, rising higher than emperors, and holding a whole continent in the hollow of their hands. The Rothschild govern a Christian world. Not a cabinet moves without their advice. They stretch their hand, with equal ease, from Petersburg to Vienna, from Vienna to Paris, from Paris to London, from London to Washington. Baron Rothschild, the head of the house, is the true king of Judah, the prince of the captivity, the Messiah so long looked for by this extraordinary people. He holds the keys of peace or war, blessing or cursing. The Banker's magazine printed in 1847 states, "The five brothers, Anselm, Solomon, Nathan, Charles and James, have taken part in most of the great financial affairs of Austria, of France, of England, and of almost every country. They have formed among themselves an invincible phalanx. By themselves, or by their agents, they have exercised a great control over the principal places in Europe, and, faithful to their habit, never to undertake anything separately and to concert all their operations, they have followed one unvaried and identical system. Their power was such, that at one time they were free to make either peace or war." The Ladies' Repository published in 1863 states, "Baron Lionel Rothschild, the first Jew ever admitted into the English Parliament, and the wealthiest man, it is believed, now residing on our planet."
So I believe that some of these images are anti-Semitic, and credit or scorn goes to the makers of these images. I didn't make them myself.
The Cyclopedia of Commercial and Business Anecdotes, printed in 1865, writes, "The Rothschilds, wealthiest bankers in the world. The House of Rothschild is the impersonation of that money power which governs the world." The Review of Reviews, printed in 1890, opined, "The change in the position of the Jew within the last half of the century is one of the most remarkable character. 50 years ago the Jew was inert and imbecile. Now he exercises a power greater than in the days of David or Solomon. The Jews today influence more people, control more bullion, and exercise more legislative power than they did when they had their temple, their land, and their scepter." Printed in 1905, Jewish Literature and Other Essays says, "The palaces of the Rothschilds, the richest family in the world, harbor many a warm heart, whose pulsations are quickened by the thought of Israel's history and poetic heritage. Wealth has not abated a jot of their enthusiasm and loyal love for the faith." Printed between 1901 and 1906, the Jewish Encyclopedia asserted, "It is a somewhat curious sequel to the attempt to set up a Catholic competitor to the Rothschilds that at the present time the latter are the guardians of the papal treasure." British economist J. A. Hobson's seminal book, Imperialism, published in 1902, states, "Does anyone seriously suppose that a great war could be undertaken by any European state, or a great state loan subscribed, if the House of Rothschild and its connections set their face against it?" The Missionary Review of the World, Volume 29, printed in 1906, disclosed, "The possession of wealth, one Jewish banking house is estimated to control $30 billion. The Rothschilds in 10 years loaned $482 million, nearly one half of the gold coined, of the entire world, is said to be in Jewish hands." In 1909, 7 years before becoming British Prime Minister, David Lloyd George stated in a speech, "I should really like to know, is Lord Rothschild the dictator of this country? Are we really to have all the ways of reform, financial and social, blocked simply by a notice board, no thoroughfare, by order of Nathaniel Rothschild?" Another of the family biographers, Derek Wilson, conceded that critics of the Rothschilds have legitimate reasons for anxiety, affirming, The House of Rothschild is immensely more powerful than any financial empire that has ever preceded it, and it is able to control governments behind the scenes, secretly. Dutch economist Ad Brouwer, in his 2010 book Ending the Global Casino, informs us that the 19th century became known as the Age of the Rothschilds when it was estimated they controlled half of the world's wealth. While their wealth continues to increase today, they have managed to blend into the background, giving an impression that their power has waned. They only apply the Rothschild name to a small fraction of the companies they actually control. Jewish leader, Louis Marshall, subtly confessed that the schemes of Zionism were a long-term plan for Jewish power grabbing, stating, "Zionism is but an incident of a far-reaching plan, it is merely a convenient peg on which to hang a powerful weapon." This Jewish world plot is not a new phenomenon by any means, and most likely originated with the advent of Judaism itself over 3,000 years ago. A shocking clue to its existence was left behind in 1492 by the Grand Sanhedrin, which resided in Constantinople. In 1492, Kemer, chief rabbi of Spain, wrote to the Grand Sanhedrin, which had its seat in Constantinople, for advice, when a Spanish law threatened expulsion. This was the reply: "Beloved brethren in Moses, we have received your letter in which you tell us of the anxieties and misfortunes which you are enduring. We are pierced by as great pain to hear it as yourselves." The advice of the grand satraps and rabbis is the following. 1. As for what you say that the King of Spain 3 obliges you to become Christians, do it, since you cannot do otherwise. 2. As for what you say about the command to despoil you of your property, make your sons merchants that they may despoil, little by little, the Christians of theirs. 3. As for what you say about making attempts on your lives, make your sons doctors and apothecaries, that they may take away Christians' lives. 4. As for what you say of their destroying your synagogues, make your sons canons and clerics in order that they may destroy their churches. 5. As for the many other vexations you complain of, arrange that your sons become advocates and lawyers, and see that they always mix in affairs of state, that by putting Christians under your yoke you may dominate the world and be avenged on them. 6. Do not swerve from this order that we give you, because you will find by experience that, humiliated as you are, you will reach the actuality of power. Signed, Prince of the Jews of Constantinople. L. Fry, Waters Flowing Eastward, The War Against the Kingship of Christ, TBR Books, Washington, D.C., 2000, pages 51-52. Also see these facsimiles of this letter. 1 and 2. The Jews hide behind a bogus veneer of victimhood in order to deceive naive Gentiles about their sinister agenda and carnivorous quest for world governance. This guilt and sympathy peddling charade is laughably transparent. Zionist Kingpin, Rabbi Stephen S. Wise, 1874–1949, the co-founder of the World Jewish Congress and other subversive groups, frantically howled that the whole of Christendom owes the Jews a homeland in Palestine for perceived wrongs done to the Jews. Wise annoyingly squawked, "The rebuilding of Zion will be the reparation of all Christendom for all the wrongs done to the Jews." In 1900, Rabbi Wise let slip the premeditated hoax of Holocaustianity when he spoke of 6 million living, bleeding, suffering arguments in favor of Zionism. That was one of dozens upon dozens of references and invocations of the Kabbalistic fable of 6 million persecuted, dead or dying Jews from 1900 through 1945, leading up to the creation of the State of Israel on the back of this deceptive, yet obvious hoax. In 1948, C. Hedsheimer, Don. The First Holocaust, Jewish fundraising campaigns with Holocaust claims during and after World War I. Chicago, Eel, Theses and Dissertations, 2003, See also, The 6 Million Myth. United States federal judge, Julian Mack, 1866–1943, chaired a plethora of Zionist organizations and worked vociferously to establish a Zionist state on stolen Palestinian land. In true Jewish supremacist fashion, this rabid nutcase demanded money from Christians to fund the heinous Zionist colonial project in Palestine, saying that this must be done in appreciation of the debt which all the world owes to the Jews. Believing the world owes them, these pompous, supremacist Jews don't just demand Palestine, they want the entire planet handed over to them on a silver platter along with all of its valuables and treasures. These damning facts, quotes and pronouncements, taken together, are extremely significant bits of evidence bearing on the existence of the Jewish world plot and the authenticity of the Protocols of Zion. Many of these astonishing statements are completely mimetic of what is outlined in the Protocols, a one-world tyrannical state governed by Jews upon which a Jewish world tyrant, whom they refer to as the King Despot of the blood of Zion, a descendant of the house of David, will be crowned king and rule the earth. Ever since that time we have been leading the peoples from one disenchantment to another, so that in the end they should turn also from us in favor of that King Despot of the blood of Zion, whom we are preparing for the world. The Protocols of Zion. 3:15. The recognition of our despot will come when the peoples, utterly wearied by the irregularities and incompetence, a matter which we shall arrange for, of their rulers, will clamor, away with them and give us one king over all the earth who will unite us and annihilate the causes of disorders, frontiers, nationalities, religions, state debts, who will give us peace and quiet which we cannot find under our rulers and representatives. The Protocols of Zion, 10:18. When the King of Israel sets upon his sacred head the crown offered him by Europe, he will become patriarch of the world. The Protocols of Zion, 1523. Much of this was affirmed by a man named Benjamin Friedman, a former Zionist and former Jew who converted to Christianity and became an outspoken critic of Zionism and international Jewish intrigue. Friedman was a successful New York businessman who had been for many years on a first-name basis with many leading Zionist power brokers as well as several American presidents. Thus he had intimate first-hand knowledge of international politics, the role Jews played in it and influence they wielded over it. He wrote a book called The Hidden Tyranny and, in 1961, gave a very illuminating speech at the Willard Hotel, Washington, D.C., primarily exposing the role of Zionist Jewry in bringing America into World War I in return for British support for the Zionist ambition to seize and colonize Palestine at the war's end. In light of the facts and information illustrated herein, the grim reality of this global Jewish conspiracy thus cannot logically be denied by any reasonable person. Only those who are partisan, or otherwise sympathetic, to Jewry will deny the existence of this cold-blooded conspiracy against Gentiles. Club Death Judaica, Bolshevist bloodletting. Bolshevism is Talmudic Judaism in disguise. As previously noted, communism, also known as Bolshevism, is a Jewish confidence trick, a swindle to establish Jewish control over Gentile nations that were not compliant with the aims of international finance Jewry. The so-called Russian Revolution of 1917 was not a Russian phenomenon at all, but rather a well-organized and executed Jewish coup d'état. The first communist-led upheaval of 1905 was also the work of plotting Jewish agitators and radicals. These are well-established facts, not spurious claims as the lying Jews would have you believe. The Jewish-controlled press, Hollywood movie industry and intellectual domain of most Western countries, have endeavored to not only downplay the role of Jews in Bolshevism, but also to whitewash Bolshevik atrocities. A conspiracy of silence regarding the monstrous crimes of communism continues even today, whilst we are pummeled from every direction with ridiculous and nonsensical Zionist propaganda about an impossible Holocaust of 6 million Jews. Snake-like liars masquerading as journalists, professors and historians even strive to glorify or romanticize communism and murderous Marxist revolutionaries. These sleazy, scum-ridden shills not only never criticize anything having to do with communism, but always describe it as a sincere and timely experiment with the greatest of social advantages. At the time, Jews openly bragged that the Russian Revolution was their making. They were the financiers, the revolutionaries and the bloodthirsty horde of murderous Cheka secret police officers, later known as the NKVD, OGPU, KGB, etc., who were responsible for liquidating untold millions of Russians and Eastern Europeans. Now Jews say, to us, no, Jews had nothing to do with it, you're just anti-Semitic. Even those Jews who might still be alive and who took part in the massacres now deny that Jews were involved in these crimes. Even though anti-Semitism became a capital crime punishable by death after the Revolution of 1917, as you shall see, Jews now ludicrously assert that they were persecuted. Even though the Christian churches burned while the synagogues were left untouched, Jews now foolishly deny that they were protected. Even though Christian priests and nuns were tortured, executed en masse and forced to sweep the streets, while Jews and rabbis lived high on the hog, Jews now comically claim they were victims of Bolshevism. This is the tried and true victim strategy that Jewish criminals have employed for millennium to evade and escape justice for their hideous crimes. The Jews had harbored tremendous enmity for the Russian Tsars, firstly because they were Christian, and secondly because the Tsars kept the Jews marginalized and in check by restricting them to their own areas, the so-called Jewish Pale, and reined them in when they got out of line. For those reasons, among others, fanatical Russian and Eastern European Jews mobilized revolutionary terror brigades to depose and assassinate the Tsars. In 1881, Tsar Alexander II was assassinated by Jews. Heir to the throne was Tsar Nicholas II, the Jews' next target. The first communist-inspired Talmudic upheaval in Christian Russia occurred in 1905, led by the Masonic Jews Leon Deutsch, Vladimir Lenin, Leibel Bronstein, alias Leon Trotsky, and Trotsky's guide and mentor Israel Helfand, alias Alexander Parvus, the multimillionaire financier who is also a political advisor of the Young Turks, that is crypto-Jews, who sparked a revolution in Ottoman Turkey in 1908, to facilitate Zionist ambitions. Parvus raked in millions in profits from the sale of weapons and foodstuffs to the Turkish army, who, under the captainship of the crypto-Jewish Young Turks, carried out the Armenian massacres of 1915, slaying 1.5 million Christians. C. Bjerknes, Christopher Jonathan, The Jewish Genocide of Armenian Christians, 2006. Jews boastfully claimed responsibility for the 1905 revolutionary uprising. For example, the Maccabean of London wrote in an article entitled A Jewish Revolution in November of 1905. The revolution in Russia is a Jewish revolution, a crisis in Jewish history. It is a Jewish revolution because Russia is the home of about half the Jews of the world, and an overturning of its despotic government must have a very important influence on the destinies of the millions living there and on the many thousands who have recently emigrated to other countries. But the revolution in Russia is a Jewish revolution also because Jews are the most active revolutionists in the Tsar's empire. Quoted in L. Fry, Waters Flowing Eastward, The War Against the Kingship of Christ, TBR Books, Washington, D.C., 2000, p. 40. Bolshevist undertakings, like Zionist ones, were subsidized by wealthy Jewish loan sharks. In preparation for the 1905 revolution, Jewish bankers manufactured a war between Russia and Japan. They had long been conducting a perfidious economic war against Russia by sabotaging Russia's ability to secure Western loans and by financing Russia's enemies. This was done in a malicious effort to weaken Russia economically and physically, thus making it ripe for revolution, communist subversion and Jewish plundering. Prominent Jewish banker and philanthropist, Jacob Henry Schiff, the Rothschild emissary in America who headed the powerhouse Kuhn, Loeb and Company Bank in New York, financed the Japanese war effort against Russia by floating them a loan of US $200,000,000. See also, genocidal Jewish supremacist Jacob H. Schiff and Jewish bankers again target Russia for revolution. For a plethora of sources documenting Schiff's schemes against Russia. The Jewish Communal Register of New York City 1917–1918 wrote of Jacob Schiff. The firm of Kuhn, Loeb & Co. floated the large Japanese war loans of $1,904.05, thus making possible the Japanese victory over Russia. Mr. Schiff has always used his wealth and his influence in the best interests of his people. He financed the enemies of autocratic Russia and used his financial influence to keep Russia from the money market of the United States. Not only did the raging Russophobe Jacob Schiff finance Russia's enemies to attack her, but he also financed the distribution of revolutionary propaganda to Russian POWs being held in Japanese prison camps during the 1904–1905 Japanese-Russo War. He had hoped that this propaganda would poison their minds against the Tsar, and upon their return to Russia at the war's end they would commit mutiny and help install the Jewish communists into power. Although the attempted revolution of 1905 failed to bring down the Russian Tsarist government, the Marxist Jews had caused a great deal of carnage. The murderous bloodletting of the Jews was noted by William Elroy Curtis, in a speech he delivered to the National Geographic Society on 14 December, 1906. The vengeance of the Jews. Perhaps these reforms are the cause of the present tranquility, because the revolutionary leaders nearly all belong to the Jewish race, and the most effective revolutionary agency is the Jewish Bund, which has its headquarters at Białystok, where the massacre occurred last June. The government has suffered more from that race than from all of its other subjects combined. Whenever a desperate deed is committed, it is always done by a Jew, and there is scarcely one loyal member of that race in the entire empire. The Great Strike which paralyzed the empire and compelled the Tsar to grant a constitution and a parliament was ordered and managed by a Jew named Krustayelf, president of the Workingmen's Council, a young man only 30 years old. He was sent to the penitentiary for life, and had not been behind the bars more than 3 weeks when he organized and conducted a successful strike of the prison employees. Maxim, who organized and conducted the revolution in the Baltic provinces, is a Jew of marvelous ability. Last fall he came over here lecturing and collecting money to carry on the revolutionary campaign, but for some reason has vanished and nobody seems to know what has become of him. Gershhunen, the most resourceful leader of the terrorists, who was condemned to life imprisonment in the silver mines on the Mongolian frontier, has recently escaped in a water cask, and is supposed to be in San Francisco. He is a Polish Jew only 27 years old. I might enumerate 100 other revolutionary leaders and every one of them would be a Jew. Wherever you've an assassination or of the explosion of a bomb, you will notice in the newspaper dispatches that the man was a Jew. The most sensational and dramatic episode that has occurred since the mutinies was on October 27, when, in the very center of St. Petersburg, at the entrance of Kazan Cathedral, 4 Jews held up a treasury wagon and captured $270,000. They passed the package to a woman, who instantly vanished, and no trace.
So I have to do some other things in the meantime, so it may hang once in a while. So you can always use cached pages to visit these pages that have disappeared off the internet, and then you can put them on a CD-ROM so that they're protected against an EMP, electromagnetic pulse. So ideas are bulletproof, but CD-ROMs are EMP proof. And donations are welcome via universalpeace.jimdo.com. So once in a while it can hang a bit, but then it will continue after a while.
Of her has ever been found, but they were all arrested and were promptly punished. On the 8th of November, a few Jewish revolutionaries entered a treasury car near Riga, in Poland, got $850,000 and disappeared. Every deed of that kind is done by Jews, and the massacres that have shocked the universe, and occurred so frequently that the name pogrom was invented to describe them, were organized and managed by the exasperated police authorities in retaliation for crimes committed by the Jewish revolutionists. W. E. Curtis, The Revolution in Russia, The National Geographic Magazine, Volume 18, Number 5, May, 1907, pages 302 to 316, at 313-314. Author Jerelina. On page 141 of his book Under the Sign of the Scorpion, described the unbridled terror inflicted by the Marxist Jews. 20,000 people were killed or crippled as a result of the terrorist actions in the years 1905-06. According to the film director Stanislav Gorukin, November put the total figure at 50,000. In March 1911, both Parvus and Trotsky began to understand that all these sporadic terrorist actions would not be enough to support and decisively change the outcome of the coup attempts in October, when the all-out political strike was organized and terrorist actions were staged, December 1905, and in January 1906, when the last, desperate attempt to overthrow the Tsar's regime was made. Lenin, who skeptically followed the events in Russia from his exile, came to the same conclusion. Mass terror was needed for a victory. The revolutionaries dreamed of civil war. The Masonic Jews fumed with anger upon realizing the utter failure of their putrid plans to overthrow the Tsar and establish a Jewish tyranny, but their homicidal dreams and desires lived on. They immediately began plotting another revolution, which manifest in the year 1917. These mealy-mouthed Marxist Jews slyly preached against capitalism by day, whilst hobnobbing with the richest of America's and Europe's Jewish capitalist bankers by night, who had been covertly subsidizing their baneful Bolshevist agitation activities for quite some time. This farcical Hebraic ruse couldn't have been more transparent. For example, the Jewish Marxist revolutionary, Leon Trotsky, socialized and played chess with uber-bourgeois Zionist Jew banker, Baron Rothschild, in Vienna. Nedava, Joseph. Trotsky and the Jews, Jewish Publication Society of America, 1972, p. 36. In 1916, the mischievous, lying Jew Trotsky was summoned to the United States by the aforementioned Jewish megabanker Jacob Schiff, and was given the task of recruiting and training Russian Jewish immigrants from the Lower East Side of New York City as Marxist terrorist radicals for the Bolshevik Revolution. On March 27, 1917, Trotsky and his 300 well-trained Jewish communists from Manhattan's Lower East Side boarded the Norwegian steamer Christiania Fjord for a journey that brought them to St. Petersburg in Russia. Before departing, Jacob Schiff gave Trotsky and his congregation of Kabbalist conspirators $20 million. Simultaneously, Lenin and his Jewish comrades, facilitated by the German government, boarded a sealed train car which took them from Scandinavia to Petrograd, sitting on $10 million in gold supplied by Germany's richest Jewish banker, Max Warburg, whose brother Paul, strangely enough, was the chief architect of the Federal Reserve System, the Rothschild-controlled Central Bank of the United States. Henry Wickham Stead, the chief editor of The Times, discerned that this financial aid went beyond the Kerensky regime, stating that the prime movers of the Bolshevik Revolution were Jacob Schiff, Warburg, and other international financiers, who wished above all to bolster up the Jewish Bolshevists in order to secure a field for German and Jewish exploitation of Russia. Stead, Henry Wickham. Through 30 years, 1892 to 1922, A Personal Narrative, Volume 2. Doubleday, Page and Company. 1924. p. 302. In Tsarism and Revolution, Omni Publications, Hawthorne, California, 1962, pages 231 to 202, we learn of the tidal wave of Jewish money flooding into the Bolshevist cause. an excerpt from a secret report, dated New York, 15th of February, 1916, quoted from Boris Brazil, The World at the Crossroads, 1921, Boston, Small, Maynard & Co., Pub. p. 19, we read. The Russian Revolutionary Party in America has decided upon a policy of overt action. Risings and disturbances may, therefore, be expected at any moment.
I'm seeing a message, reconnection successful. I think they are blocking stuff because it may be a hack, basically, somebody hacking me, because the CPU is at 50%, and so my apologies for the long breaks, but eventually it keeps on reading. So I'm switching to the other camera. This is the outside camera. We've had some lightning today, some thunder, and I'll have to close some tabs, perhaps that will help. But I doubt if that's the problem. I've closed Waterfox, and normally this browser doesn't give any problems. Okay, I sent my message, so let's continue.
The first secret meeting, marking the commencement of this new period of violence, was held on the East Side in the evening of February 14 and was attended by 62 delegates, of whom 50 were veterans of 1905, while the remaining 12 were newly joined members. The majority consisted of Jewish intellectuals, some of whom were professional revolutionaries. The discussions at this meeting were mainly centered around the opportunities offered and the means available for staging a revolution on a grand scale in Russia, the present time being considered extremely propitious. As previously reported, the party had just received from Russia secret information to the effect that all the necessary preliminaries for an immediate rising had been concluded. The only question of concern to the meeting was that of a possible shortage of funds. However, as soon as it arose, several members announced that no fears should be entertained on that subject as, at the appropriate time, the necessary money would be supplied by the sympathizers. In this connection, the name of Jakob Schiff was repeatedly mentioned. A copy, dated September 23, 1919, of To Moscow, published in Rostov, contains further interesting facts about the part played by Jacob Schiff in the 1917 revolution. According to this paper, the information is based on a document originating from the French High Commissioner in Washington. The authenticity of this document cannot be contested as it was extracted from the archives of one of the high French government offices. Later it was quoted by Gen. Nichvoladov in his book, previously mentioned, pages 97 to 104. Nichvoladov claims that it was drafted by official branches of the American services and handed by them to the French High Commissioner. I present a few quotations. In February 1916, it was learnt that a revolution was being fomented in Russia and that the following persons and business concerns were engaged in this destructive enterprise. 1. Jacob Schiff. 2. Kuhn, Loeb and Company. Directors, Jacob Schiff, Felix Warburg, Otto Kahn, Mortimer Schiff, Jerome H. Hanauer. 3. Guggenheim. 4. Max Breitungen. It would therefore appear that the revolution in Russia, which broke out 1 year after this information was first reported, was sustained by Jewish interests. In April 1917, Jacob Schiff publicly declared that it was thanks to his financial support that the revolution in Russia had succeeded. In the spring of the same year, Schiff commenced to subsidize Trotsky, who also received a contribution from Forward, a Jewish publication of New York. Simultaneously, Trotsky and Company were also being subsidized by Max Warburg and Olaf Askberg of the Nye Bank in Stockholm, another Jewish concern, the Rhine-Westphalian Syndicate and Životovsky, a wealthy Jew whose daughter later married Trotsky. Relations were thus established between multimillionaire and proletarian Jewry. There follows a list of names drawing attention to the predominance of the Jewish element in the first Soviets. This document, after stressing the ties linking Kuhn, Loeb and Company and other Jewish financial establishments, expresses the opinion that the Bolshevik movement to a certain degree is the expression of a more general Jewish movement and that certain Jewish banking houses are interested in its furtherance. Jacob Schiff did indeed publicly boast that thanks are due to the Jew that the revolution in Russia had succeeded. Jury Lena documented in similar terms how Jewish loan sharks from America and Western Europe were throwing money at the Bolsheviks. It was above all Jacob and Mortimer Schiff, Felix Warburg, Otto H. Kahn, Max Warburg, Jerome J. Hanauer, Alfred Milner and the Copper family Guggenheim who financed the Bolsheviks, according to the Jewish historian David Shub. A document, 861.005339, in the archives of the U.S. State Department confirms this. Two further names are mentioned in this document, Max Breitungen and Isaac Seligman. All those people were Jews and Freemasons. According to the same document, plans to depose the Tsar were made in February 1916. There are always some people who make money out of wars and revolutions. We must not forget this when we seek to understand history. The Zionist banker and Freemason Max Warburg played an important role in funding the communist propaganda in Russia. He saw to it that the industrialist Hugo Stin agreed to give 2 million rubles to the Bolsheviks' publishing activity on the 12th of August 1916. Zeman, Germany and the Revolution in Russia, 1915-18. Documents from the archives of the German Foreign Ministry, London, 1958, p. 92. Thus there are documents extant which show that Max Warburg and other super-wealthy Jews supported communism. These statements are not just made up, as certain know-it-alls have claimed. Under the sign of the Scorpion, p. 180, of course, the Jew bankers got a great return on their investment. The Jew Bolsheviks methodically despoiled the wealth and valuables of Russia and the Tsar, shipping boatloads of gold back to the vaults of Kuhn, Loeb and Company in America, Warburg Banks in Germany, and their own private bank accounts in various countries. The banker Jakob Schiff had given Leon Trotsky $20 million to organize a Bolshevik takeover. That gamble certainly paid off. 600 million rubles in gold were transferred to the United States of America between 1918 and 1922, according to the historian Gary Allen. In the first half of 1921 alone, the banking house of Kuhn, Loeb and Company made a profit of $102,290,000 on the wealth the Bolsheviks had robbed, according to the New York Times, August 23, 1921. Multiply that sum by 100 and you have the present-day value of that money. The Russian historian Dmitry Volkogonov revealed after findings in the Communist Party archives that just the Tsarina's private reserves amounted to 475 million rubles in gold, plus 7 million for the crown jewels. Dagens Nyheter, 31st of August 1992, the Bolshevik Financial Department Goskren confiscated all of this. Some Swedish journalists, including Staffan Scott, have, in accord with the prevailing myth, tried to explain that most of this wealth was handed over to the communist parties in other countries, while millions of Russians died of starvation. That is not entirely accurate. According to the historian Igor Bunik, Lenin and Trotsky took care of this money personally. The gold, meanwhile, was smuggled out of Russia and deposited into personal bank accounts around the world. 30 tons of gold per year were produced in the Tsarist era in Russia, under the sign of the Scorpion, p. 237. Immediately upon their arrival in Russia, the bloody banditry of Jewry commenced, unleashing a carnivorous crusade of destruction never before seen or heard of. The revolutionary turmoil of 1917, led by the name-changing crypto-Jews Vladimir Ulyanov, alias Lenin, Leibel Bronstein, alias Leon Trotsky, Jacob Sverdlov, Moyaritsky, Lev Rosenfeld, alias Kamenev, Gregory Radomilsky, alias Zinoviev, Lazar Moiseyevich Kaganovich, Karl Sobelson, alias Radek, Israel Helfhand, alias Alexander Parvis, Rosalina Zalkind, Aaron Kuhn, alias Bela Kun, and 1,001 other Jew Bolsheviks, wrought the stench of death upon the Rushland, converting Russia into a temple of evil. When Lenin's Bolsheviks seized the state in October of 1917, the Russians had become sacrificial lambs to be sent to the slaughterhouse by the new kosher communist butchers who ruled the country with an iron fist. One of the first acts of brutality that set the stage for the following 70 years of bloodshed, famine, poverty and death, was the cold-blooded assassination of the Russian imperial family, the Romanovs, Tsar Nicholas II, his wife, daughters and son, by a death squad of Jewish Bolshevik brigands. On orders of Jakob Schiff, the Romanovs were shot and bayoneted in the Ipativ house in Ekaterinburg where they had sought refuge, by a coterie of homicidal Jewish assassins, Jacob Sverdlov, first president of the Soviets, Yankel Yurovsky, Cheka general, known as an avid reader of the Talmud, Gilashchikin, Safrov, Voykov, and Sira Militov. The members of the imperial family in closest succession to the throne were assassinated the following night. In the last days of the Romanovs, p. 393, Robert Wilton, on assignment for the London Times in Russia for 17 years, summed up the Russian Revolution in these words. The whole record of the Bolshevism in Russia is indelibly impressed with the stamp of alien invasion. The murder of the Tsar, deliberately planned by the Jews Sverdlov and carried out by the Jews Galashkin, Sira Militov, Safrov, Voykov, and Yurovsky, is the act, not of the Russian people, but of this hostile invader. The Jewish domination in Russia is supported by certain Russians, the Burgess Ulyanov alias Lenin, the noble Chicherin, the dissenter Bonch Bruevich. They are all mere screens or dummies behind which the Sverdlovs and the 1,001 Jews of Sovpedia continue their work of destruction, having wrecked and plundered Russia by appealing to the ignorance of the working folk. They are now using their dupes to set up a new tyranny worse than any that the world has known. Sovietdom has consecrated 3 heroes to whom monuments have been erected. to Karl Marx, to Judas Iscariot, and to Leo Tolstoy, the three names that are associated with the revolution, apostasy and anarchism, two of them Jews. This stamp of alien invasion, as Robert Wilton put it, was unmistakably Jewish and Talmudic. Anti-Zionist author Douglas Reed explained the ethnic clues left behind by the Judist killers of the Romanov family, and its incredible meaning. The chief reason for recounting the details of the pogrom of the Romanovs is to point to the fingerprint which was left in the room where it was done. One of the assassins, presumably their leader, stayed to exult and put a significant signature on the wall, which was covered with obscene or mocking inscriptions in Hebrew, Magyar and German. Among them was a couplet which deliberately related the deed to the law of the Torah Talmud and thus offered it to posterity as an example of the fulfillment of that law, and of Jewish vengeance as understood by the Levites. It was written in German by someone who parodied the Jewish poet Heinrich Heine's lines on the death of Belshazzar, the imaginary potentate whose murder is portrayed in Daniel as God's punishment for an affront offered to Judah. Belshazzar war Daber in selbiger Nacht, van selbigen Nachten umgebracht. The parodist, sardonically surveying the shambles, adapted these lines to what he had just done. Belshazzar ward in selbiger Nacht van seinen Nächten umgebracht. No clearer clue to motive and identity was ever left behind. The Controversy of Zion, p. 195. As Douglas Reed aptly noted, the mocking inscription left on the wall of the Ipativ house where the Romanovs were butchered were lines adapted from a poem by German Jewish poet, Heinrich Heine, which alluded to the death of a Gentile ruler, Belshazzar, cleverly spelled Belsasr, in the well-known Old Testament story, who saw the writing on the wall foretelling his destruction, Daniel 5, and was killed as punishment for his offenses against the Jews' bloodthirsty deity. The intended symbolism was obviously that another Gentile king, the Tsar, was killed as an act of Jewish retribution. See also, Waters Flowing Eastward, chapter, The Writing on the Wall, for the Kabbalistic significance of these inscriptions. Interestingly, the wealth of the Rothschild family, which can be credited with bringing these Jew communists to power in Russia, is believed by some Jews to be for a higher purpose: to avenge the wrongs of Israel. Also of great relevance to this story is the fact that poet Heinrich Heine was a friend of Karl Marx, and had once subtly remarked that most Gentiles had no idea about Jewish schemes or worldly ambitions, but that we would find out only after becoming their slaves. Heine said, "The deeds of the Jews are as little known to the world as their true nature. Some think they know the Jews because they have seen their beards, but that's all that appeared of them. In the Middle Ages and in modern times too the Jews are a walking mystery. This mystery will be resolved, perhaps, and all will be revealed, on the day which the prophet has foretold, when there will be only one shepherd and one flock, and when the righteous who suffered for the salvation of mankind will receive recognition and glory." Proer, Siegbert Salomon. Heine's Jewish Comedy, a study of his portraits of Jews and Judaism, Oxford, Clarendon, 1983. p. 622. The Jewishness of communism, Bolshevism and the Soviet regime was attested to not only by the Russian people, but also by American, British, and other government officials and commissions, intrepid journalists who witnessed the 1917 Bolshevik coup firsthand, and even some braggadocious Jews themselves. Rabbi Stephen S. Wise, one of the top Jewish mafia kingpins in the world, when alive, once declared, "Some call it Marxism, I call it Judaism." The American Bulletin, Rabbi S. Wise, May 5, 1935. The Jewish Chronicle of London, April 4, 1914, boasted that Bolshevism is Judaism, stating, "There is much in the fact of Bolshevism itself, in the fact that so many Jews are Bolshevists, in the fact that the ideals of Bolshevism at many points are consonant with the finest ideals of Judaism." The September 10, 1920, edition of American Hebrew magazine pompously bragged, "The Bolshevist revolution in Russia was the work of Jewish brains, of Jewish dissatisfaction, of Jewish planning, whose goal is to create a new order in the world." What was performed in so excellent a way in Russia, thanks to Jewish brains, and because of Jewish dissatisfaction, and by Jewish planning, shall also, through the same Jewish mental and physical forces, become a reality all over the world. On the 12th of April, 1919, the newspaper Communist, Kharkiv, published Comrade M. Cohen's article The Jews' Services to the Working Class, where he wrote the following. It can be said without exaggeration that the great socialist October Revolution was brought about through the hands of the Jews. The red five-pointed star, which was known as a Judaic symbol in ancient times, has now been taken over by the Russian proletariat. Jewish commissars as leaders of committees and Soviet, Council Kohol, organizations lead the Russian proletariat to victory. Could the dark and oppressed masses of Russian workers and peasants throw off the yoke of the bourgeoisie themselves? No, it was the Jews from beginning to end who showed the Russian proletariat the way to the rosy dawn of internationalism and who to this day rule Soviet Russia. The proletariat can feel secure in the hands of the Jews. We can become while Comrade Trotsky commands the Red Army. Quoted in Under the Sign of the Scorpion, p. 133. The 1905 Jewish Encyclopedia's article on socialism tells us, while in Germany socialism has attracted individual Jews, in Russia it has become a movement of the Jewish masses. In 1906, the New York Times reported on a gathering of anti-Russian, pro-communist Jews in Berlin, Germany. Dr. Paul Nathan, a well-known Jewish publicist, called for Russia's destruction. Dr. Nathan read to the meeting a circular, from the Russian Tsarist government, addressed to the Russian garrison of Odessa, calling upon the soldiers to rise and crush the traitors who are plotting to upset the holy government of the Tsar and substitute for it a Jewish empire. He concluded with an appeal to the Jewish money powers of the world to arrest Russia's career as a borrower. The financiers of the world should call a halt to Russia, not only for humanitarian reasons, but for practical reasons. Russia's bankruptcy is an established fact, he added. The Encyclopedia Judaica's article on communism substantiates much of what so-called anti-Semites have long been saying about communism and the Soviet experiment's Jewish origins, motives and character. It confesses. The communist movement and ideology played an important part in Jewish life, particularly in the 1920s, 1930s, and during and after World War II. Individual Jews played an important role in the early stages of Bolshevism and the Soviet regime. In some countries Jews became the leading element in the legal and illegal communist parties and in some cases were even instructed by the Communist International to change their Jewish-sounding names and pose as non-Jews, in order not to confirm right-wing propaganda that presented communism as an alien, Jewish conspiracy. The Bolshevik faction contained a number of Jews mainly in the field of organization and propaganda. They included such people as Maxim Livanov, Wallach, M. Lyadov, Mandelstam, Gregory Shklovsky, A. Sultz, S. Gzv, Drabgin, Gregory Zinoviev, Radomyslsky, Lev Kamenev, Rosenfeld, Rosalia Zemliaka, Zolkind, Helena Razmirovich, Yemily Yaroslavsky, Gubelman, Serafim Gopner, G. Sokolnikov, I. Platnitsky, Jacob Sverdlov, M. Vladimirov, P. Zalutsky, A. Lazovsky, Y. Klevlev, Epstein, Lazar Kaganovich, D. Schwarzman, Simon Demanstein, Trotsky, Bronstein, M. Ritsky, M. Volodarsky, J. Slaklov, Adolf Joffe, David Ryazanov, Goldenbach, Yuri Larin and Karl Radek, Sobelson. See this facsimile of the Encyclopedia Judaica's article. Ted Pike, in his article Jewish Activists Created Communism, provides the following commentary concerning the Encyclopedia Judaica's revealing article on Jews and communism. The Encyclopedia Judaica's article on communism, continues by admitting that the anti-Semitic counteroffensive of the White Russian armies in 1918 drove the bulk of Russian Jewish youth into the ranks of the Bolshevik regime. This means that the majority of all young Soviet Jews were communists. Jews, it says, found great opportunity within Bolshevism, occupying many responsible positions in all branches of the party and state machinery at the central and local seats of power. p. 791. The highly disproportionate amount of Jews in the party hierarchy is also admitted in the Encyclopedia Judaica's article. During the revolution, Jews played a prominent part in the party organs. The Politburo elected on October 23, 1917 had 4 Jews among its 7 members. The Military Revolutionary Committee, appointed to prepare the coup, was headed by Trotsky and had 2 Jews among its 5 members. In the early years of the Soviet regime, Jews were in many leading positions in the government and party machinery. Page 797-98. The Encyclopedia Judaica goes on to inadvertently clarify why the native Russians were so bent on anti-Semitic activities. When the Russian people heroically attempted to regain their freedom from the communists, the Judaica says compact Jewish masses in these areas were utilized as a counterweight, which would swing the balance in the centralist regime's favor. p. 798. In other words, the bulk of Jewish youth in every outlying hamlet of Russia became the compact Jewish masses whose task it was to forcibly impose and maintain communist slavery upon freedom-loving peoples. Jews and the Russian populace were locked in a death struggle for survival and the future of Russia. Is it any wonder that the White Russians rose up in rage, even to the point of liquidating their oppressors? Who would not have done the same? In the Jewish Experience, 1996, p. 364, Jewish author Norman Cantor freely admits and proudly boasts of the Jewish caste that comprised the Bolshevik hierarchy in Russia, stating, "The Bolshevik Revolution and some of its aftermath represented, from one perspective, Jewish revenge." During the heyday of the Cold War, American Jewish publicists spent a lot of time denying that, as 1930s anti-Semites claimed, Jews played a disproportionately important role in Soviet and world communism. The truth is, until the early 1950s Jews did play such a role, and there is nothing to be ashamed of. In time Jews will learn to take pride in the record of the Jewish communists in the Soviet Union and elsewhere. It was a species of striking back. Author Edward Schoonmaker, writing in Democracy and World Dominion, 1939, p. 211. Confirms Cantor's rhetoric and elaborated on how Jewish synagogues were left untouched by the Bolsheviks, while the Christian churches were all burned to the ground. 15 years after the Bolshevist Revolution was launched to carry out the Marxist program, the editor of the American Hebrew could write, according to such information, as, the writer could secure while in Russia a few weeks ago, not one Jewish synagogue has been torn down, as have hundreds, perhaps thousands, of the Greek Catholic churches. American Hebrew, November 18, 1932, p. 12. Apostate Jews, leading a revolution that was to destroy religion as the opiate of the people, had somehow spared the synagogues of Russia. Another Jewish writer, Sever Blocher, also lent credence to much of what the anti-Semites say about Jews and communism. In an article published on netnews.com entitled, Stalin's Jews, he rightly reminded us that some of the greatest murderers of modern times were Jewish. British and American intelligence reports relayed information about the Jewishness of Bolshevism and the new Soviet regime, describing the Bolshevik leadership as being as much as 90% Jewish. Robert Wilton, the previously mentioned correspondent of the London Times on assignment in Russia during the Communist Revolution of 1917, outlined the ethnic makeup of the Bolshevik state as such. According to the data furnished by the Soviet press, out of 556 important functionaries of the Bolshevik state there were in 1918-1919, 17 Russians, 2 Ukrainians, 11 Armenians, 35 Lets, 15 Germans, 1 Hungarian, 10 Georgians, 2 Poles, 2 Finns, 1 Karaim.
These are some George Soros images I was able to track down on the internet. And there's this petition on the whitehouse.gov website that I've covered in my previous broadcasts that is about confiscating all George Soros's assets. But the petition for arresting him did not get enough signatures, and this one did, so then that requires a reply of the White House. And I've covered that petition in my previous broadcasts. So some of these quotes may be correct, and one from Build magazine might not be correct, this one. But to know if it's correct, you'd have to contact Build, not to listen to others that have their opinion about it, though. They may not have studied it, they might have an opinion that's based on nothing, basically.
$400 50 juice. As the decades passed by, after the fateful year 1917, Judaized Khazars kept a firm hand on the helm of the government in the occupied land of Russia. In due time they built a bureaucracy to their heart's desire. In a report of the American Expeditionary Forces to Siberia, March 1, 1919, compiled by Captain Montgomery Schuyler, speaking of events following the decline of the first provisional government, it reads,
My previous broadcasts are not this bad, so sorry about the interruptions. And please check my previous broadcasts, my channel. It's down here somewhere, or BC Hoffman, and there you can find lots of subjects and better videos than this one. Some of them are also pretty bad, but some of them are very potent, short, good videos. And well, usually I make a broadcast, and then after I've done the broadcast, I start collecting more data on the internet or thinking about other stuff, and it's also covered in these broadcasts. Basically, it's live, so people can Skype me live on ProLogic 999. But the problem is that I've discovered that Skype has to be on and open, and if I minimize it, then it says away for people that want to Skype me. That's weird. So if you know how to solve this, please comment or Skype ProLogic 999.
These hopes were frustrated by the gradual gains in power of the more irresponsible and socialistic elements of the population, guided by the Jews and other anti-Russian races. A table made in April 1918 by Robert Wilton, the correspondent of the London Times in Russia, shows that at that time there were 384 commissars including 2 Negroes, 13 Russians, 15 Chinamen, 22 Armenians and more than 300 Jews. Of the latter number, 264 had come to Russia from the United States since the downfall of the imperial government. Schuyler frankly described the Bolshevik movement as being guided and controlled by Russian Jews of the greasiest type, from the outset. Reverend George E. Simons, the superintendent of the Methodist Episcopal Church in Petrograd from 1907 to 1918, was an eyewitness to the Bolshevik Revolution. He testified before the United States Senate, and stated that most of the Bolshevist leaders were Jews from the Lower East Side of New York City. Out of 388 members of the new Russian government, only 16 happened to be Russians. 1 was an American black, all the rest, 371, were Jews. Of these 371 Jewish Bolshevik leaders, no less than 265 of them were from the Lower East Side of New York City. In 1919, the U.S. Senate held a subcommittee inquiry into Bolshevik propaganda. An American teacher named R.B. Dennis, who had worked as a teacher in Russia during the revolution, said that the Bolshevik leaders were all Russian Hebrews who had previously lived in America anywhere from 3 to 12 years. An American banker named William Welsh, who had worked in Russia between July 1916 and September 1918, told the committee, "It might be well to explain a little the general fact that most of the Bolshevik leaders are Jews, in order to avoid misunderstanding. In Russia it is well known that 3/4 of the Bolshevik leaders are Jewish." Shortly after the Bolshevik Revolution, the U.S. ambassador in Russia sent a dispatch to Washington confirming that most of the Bolshevik leaders were Jews who had been previously exiled for revolutionary activities. The Bolshevik leaders here, most of whom are Jews and 90% of whom are returned exiles, care little for Russia or any other country but are internationalists, and they are trying to start a worldwide social revolution. See this image of the appropriate text. Mr. Summers, U.S. Consul General in Moscow on May 2, 1918, sent a telegram to the Secretary of State in Washington, D.C. saying in part, "Jew predominant in local Soviet government, anti-Jewish feeling growing among population which tends to regard oncoming Germans as deliverers." In 1919 the British Parliament compiled a white paper on Bolshevism titled, Russia No. 1, a collection of reports on Bolshevism in Russia. In it we find that Bolshevism is portrayed as a movement carried on by the Jews and despised by the Russian people. An overview of the relevant portions of this document relating to the Jewish hand in Bolshevism in Russia is as follows. The relevant pages concerning Jews and Bolshevism are pp. 6, 23, 28, 32, 33, 41, 57, 65, 68, 78. On p.6 of the document, not the PDF, we find a telegram from Sir M. Findlay to Mr. Balfour relaying a report by the Netherlands minister at Petrograd, which contains the following message. I consider that the immediate suppression of Bolshevism is the greatest issue now before the world, not even excluding the war which is still raging, and unless, as above stated, Bolshevism is nipped in the bud immediately, it is bound to spread in one form or another over Europe and the whole world, as it is organized and worked by Jews who have no nationality, and whose one object is to destroy for their own ends the existing order of things. p. 23 signifies that the Jews had preferential treatment, as they were allowed to engage in illicit trading, while all other trade was at a standstill. It also contains documentation to the effect that Bolshevism was despised by the Russians, but carried out by Jews. p. 28 says, the Bolsheviks can no longer be described as a political party holding extreme communistic view. They form relatively small privileged class which is able to terrorize the rest of the population because it has a monopoly both of arms and of food supplies. This class consists chiefly of workmen and soldiers, and included a large non-Russian element, such as Lets and Estonians and Jews. The latter are especially numerous in higher posts. Members of this class are allowed complete license, and commit crime against other sections of society. p. 32 states the Bolsheviks comprised chiefly Jews and Germans, who were exceedingly active and enterprising. The Russians were largely anti-Bolshevik, but were for the most part dreamers, incapable of any sustained action, who now, more than ever before, were unable to throw off the yoke of their oppressors. Night after night the counter-revolutionary societies held secret meetings to plot against the Bolsheviks, but never once was a serious attempt made to carry through the conspiracy.
Thank
The
you,
starving
darling.
condition of the people quite paralyzed their willpower. P.
Grab him by the pussy.
33. Document number 33 says, from examination of several laborer and peasant witnesses I have evidence to the effect that very smallest percentage of this district were pro-Bolshevik, majority of laborers sympathizing with summoning of constituent assembly. Witnesses further stated that Bolshevik leaders did not represent Russian working classes, most of them being Jews. P. 41. Document number 38. Reveals that the party responsible for the murder of the Romanovs consisted entirely of Jews. P. 56. Document number 56 says again that Bolshevism was a movement led by Jews. P. 57. The results says that after the revolution, Jews became the possessors of most of the business houses. It states, all business became paralyzed, shops were closed, Jews became possessors of most of the business houses, and horrible scenes of starvation became common in the country districts. The peasants put their children to death rather than see them starve. In a village on the Dvina, not far from Schlosselburg, a mother hanged 3 of her children. I was conducting a funeral in a mortuary of a lunatic asylum at Udelna, near Petrograd, and saw the bodies of a mother and her 5 children whose throats had been cut by the father because he could not see them suffer. P. 65. The Terror notes the persecution of Russians for thought crimes, and the fact that people had to pay intermediaries, who were mostly Jewish, before they could obtain their release. P. 68 shows that the food supply committees were entirely in the hands of Jews, and that anti-Semitism was rampant because of the extreme misery that ensued after the Jews had obtained control. Summary provided by Blicenta. In November of 1917, the foreign minister of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, Count Ottokar von Czernin, wrote, I have during the last few days received reliable information about the Bolsheviks. Their leaders are almost all of them Jews with altogether fantastic ideas, and I do not envy the country that is governed by them. Sir Paul Dykes was an MI6 espionage agent working undercover in Bolshevik Russia for the first few years after the revolution. Upon his return home to Britain, he published a book about his experiences called Red Dusk and the Morrow, 1922. In it he relates an interesting conversation he had with a Lithuanian who told him about overhearing a Bolshevik figure say, our power is based on 3 things, first, on Jewish brains, secondly, on Lettish and Chinese bayonets, and thirdly on the crass stupidity of the Russian people. Red Dusk and the Morrow, p. 316. Overzealous Jews oftentimes inadvertently give themselves away by tacitly admitting to things that they would otherwise try to deny. 2 New York Jewish publications, Jewish Life and Jewish Voice, tacitly confessed that communism is Judaism when they told their readers, anti-communism is anti-Semitism. Scratch a professional anti-communist and you'll find an anti-Semite. Besides being a Bolshevik mass murderer, Leon Trotsky Bronstein was also a crypto-Zionist who had attended the 6th Zionist Congress in Basel in 1903. In a 1937 interview in the New York Jewish newspaper, Daily Forward, Trotsky hinted at the real motives behind his revolutionary activities when he pathetically crowed, "The longer the rotten bourgeoisie society lives, the more and more barbaric will anti-Semitism become everywhere." Bourgeoisie was clearly a Judeo-Bolshevik code word for Gentile. Lenin's Jewish roots was a state secret, but was finally revealed by declassified KGB files and put on display in Moscow's State Historical Museum in 2011. Lenin couldn't have made it more obvious that he was a crypto-Jew, seeing as he had nothing but glowing esteem for the Jews and immediately decreed anti-Semitism a crime punishable by execution. The human devil, Lenin, praised the Jews as the best revolutionaries, saying, "The clever Russian is almost always a Jew or has Jewish blood in him." Dmitry Volkogonov, Lenin, A New Biography, p. 112. He was surely referring to himself. Lenin heaped accolade and adulation on the Jews, revealing that not only was he a Jew, but a chauvinistic Jewish supremacist. He once said, "There the great universally progressive features of Jewish culture have made themselves clearly felt. Its internationalism, its responsiveness of the advanced movements of our times, the percentage of Jews in democratic and proletarian movements is everywhere higher than the percentage of Jews in the general population. Those Jewish Marxists who join up in the international Marxist organizations with the Russian, Lithuanian, Ukrainian and other workers, adding their might, both in Russian and in Jewish, to the creation of an international culture of the working class movement, are continuing the best traditions of Jewry." Quoted in Gould, Alan. What did they think of the Jews? Jason Aronson Incorporated, 1991, p. 241, Baron. Joseph L. Stars and Sand, Jewish Notes by Non-Jewish Notables, Jewish Publication Society of America, 1944, p. 175. The two-faced cheat Lenin, the so-called man of the people, champion of the workers, even defended parasitic Jewish usury and loan sharking. And those gentlemen on the right benches talk about the Jews exploiting the peasants, about Jewish usury. But thousands of Jewish merchants would not skin the Russian muzhik in the way the true Russian, Christian landlords do. The interest claimed by the worst usurer is not to be compared with that claimed by the true Russian landlord, who hires the muzhik in the winter for summer work or who forces him to pay for a decaden of land in labor, money, eggs, chickens, and God alone knows what else. V.I. Lenin, draft for a speech on the agrarian question in the Second State Duma, 1907. Lenin, the monstrous criminal, excitedly advocated every manner of deception, barbarity and wickedness. He encouraged lies and deceit, stating, "We must utilize all possible cunning and illegal methods, deny and conceal the truth," noting that a lie told often enough becomes the truth. Deceitful Jewish propagandists have duped the world into believing that German Nazi leaders Joseph Goebbels and Adolf Hitler invented and utilized the big lie technique as a method to fool the German masses. This is false and nothing more than psychological projection. In reality, Goebbels stressed that good propaganda must be accurate and truthful, stating that good propaganda does not need to lie. Indeed, it may not lie. It has no reason to fear the truth. It is a mistake to believe that people cannot take the truth. They can. It is only a matter of presenting the truth to people in a way that they will be able to understand. A propaganda that lies proves that it has a bad cause.
Not always, I think, but I have some lemonade with aloe and some chamomile tea. Hoorah.
It cannot be successful in the long run. Weber, Mark. Fraudulent Nazi Quotations. Institute for Historical Review. In 1941, Goebbels published an article in which he charged British propagandists with adopting the big lie technique,
Universal
stating,
peace now.
the English follow the principle that when one lies, one should lie big, and stick to it. They keep up their lies, even at the risk of looking ridiculous. Goebbels, Joseph. Churchill's Lie
You're going
Factory,
to have a deportation force, and you're going to do it humanely, and you're going to have a deportation
identified
force.
and condemned the big lie technique as an invention and tactic of the Jews. In this day, the Jews proceeded on the sound
shit out of these people.
principle that the magnitude of a lie always contains a certain factor of credibility, since the great masses of the people in the very bottom of their hearts tend to be corrupted rather than consciously and purposely evil, and that, therefore, in view of the primitive simplicity of their minds, they more easily fall victim to a big lie than to a little one, since they themselves lie in little things, but would be ashamed of lies that were too big. Such a falsehood will never enter their heads, and they will not be able to believe in the possibility of such monstrous effrontery and infamous misrepresentation in others. Mein Kampf.
Out here in the perimeter there are no stars. Out here we is stoned, immaculate.
My God, it's full of stars.
The government is criminal, okay?
p. 231 of the Mannheim translation. Upon his assumption of power, the repulsive crypto-Jew Lenin decried anti-Semitism in the harshest possible terms. He chastised anti-Semitism as a counter-revolutionary act, and thus it was punishable by death. Even anti-Semitic speech constituted the death penalty, or life imprisonment, in the Jew hell of Soviet Russia. If being against Jews was counter-revolutionary, then that must have meant that all the revolutionaries were Jewish. In July of 1918, Lenin signed an order of the Council of People's Commissars which declared anti-Semitism and pogroms a mortal danger to the revolution, that is the Jewish takeover. The Council of People's Commissars declares that the anti-Semitic movement and pogroms against the Jews are fatal to the interests of the workers' and peasants' revolution and calls upon the toiling people to fight this evil with all the means at their disposal. National hostility weakens the ranks of our revolutionaries, disrupts the united front of the toilers without distinctions of nationality, and helps only our enemies. The Council of People's Commissars instructs all Soviet deputies to take uncompromising measures to tear the anti-Semitic movement out by the roots. Pogromists and pogrom agitators are to be placed outside the law. Baron Solowit Mayer. The Russian Jew under Tsars and Soviets, Macmillan, 1976, p. 180, Strauss, Herbert A. Hostages of Modernization, Walter de Gruyter, 1993, p. 1324, A. Nelson Field remarked in Appendix B of his book, All These Things, Lenin was married to a Jewess, spoke Yiddish in his family circle, and Dr. Chaim Weizmann, Jewish Zionist leader, was quoted in the London Jewish Chronicle of December 16, 1932.
Sup, Jew? You're Jewish. Dude is Jewish. Kyle is a Jew rat. Kyle, so help me God, if you Jew us out on this one, I will fucking kill you. Just shut your Jew mouth! Sneaky Jew! You dumb Jew. Then you filthy Jew! You sneaky Jew rat. Jews have been persecuted across the earth for good reason. Jews being lame and stuff. All Jews carry gold in a little bag around their necks. The Jews took all the money away. Jewish people don't have rhythm. Jews can't play basketball. Jews cannot play hockey. Jews can't be paladins. Jews can't be pirates. You fucking Jews ruined Christmas because Jews don't believe in heaven. Stan, you're a Jew? Come on, Butters, you stupid Jew. Kitty, you're a Jew. My friend Kyle is a Jew, too. Shut up, you shifty Jew! Oh, yeah? Well, you're a stupid Jew. You're a Jew. Shut your goddamn Jew mouth! Good job, Jew. I'd rather hang out at home than have to be around you and your Jew mom for a day. Jew, bitch! At least I'm not a stupid Jew. I tried to have all the Jews exterminated last spring. Goddamn Jews! Jew! 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 Jews! Jew! 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 Jews! Jews! Hey, you guys, you know what they call Jewish women's boobs? Jubes.
So it was South Park. Eric Cartman doesn't like the Jews. Yellow Car Productions amplified. About the article, of course, it's fascinating stuff, but it's very long and it will continue for a while. And I'm noticing that there are some new stuff in relation to the nuclear deal. So you can all read this for yourselves with catchedpages.com. It's JWO, New World Order Unmasked, UnmaskedZionCrimeFactory.com, February 25th, 2013. So then I think I'll make another broadcast about the other articles. This was just an example. Sorry about breaks in the speech engine. I've switched off some things, so perhaps it will be better now. Oh yeah, it's interesting that it's written by a Jewish person, perhaps a truly self-hating Jew or somebody that exposes the evil side of Judaism or Jewish people. Of course, in every group around the world you can find good and bad people, and we may not condemn or prosecute whole countries or groups of people for something one or two of them have orchestrated. But I do advocate arresting the Committee of 300 members and all Freemasons and doing an investigation into the doctors around the world if there are other serial killing doctors that have insane amounts of dead patients. So for now, this is it for Zion Crime Factory. Yeah, I think other more important stuff is in my previous broadcast. Also how to prevent a world war with Iran, to at least have an agreement with the now leader President Putin if they decide to bomb Iranian facilities where they didn't allow the inspections. Then that could lead to a world war, and that must be prevented. Since Israel has nuclear weapons, you could argue there should be sanctions on Israel as well, against Israel like against Iran. And they have missile shields, so Iran cannot pose any threat to Israel anyhow. They also have a Tesla plasma shield, of which I have shown a picture in previous broadcasts, and this may be secret technology, so they might lie about possessing nukes and about directed energy weapon technology, because they are instructed to do so. Also, you could argue it's in the Bible, the former Mossad slogan, by means of deception thou shalt do war or something, which is not Torah, but Psalms or Proverbs or whatever. So to prevent world war is more important, though Iran is not insignificant with cancer oil, of course. So it's no blood for cancer oil, Yankee go home. And another slogan banner could be saying fake, the word fake on a big thing on a stick, and then carry it like that. Okay, so universal peace now, and thanks to the creator of this great website. Thanks for putting it online. I hope it has already influenced our timeline beneficially. And people can always Skype me, Prologic999, for universal peace. Alright. And I'll temporarily halt this broadcast again for universal peace.